Hello, my name is Xander. Welcome back to Django Core. This is a first look at Django Middleware. This tutorial has 7 topics. It's all supported by code examples. You'll find a link to the code repository in the video description. Here we're going to start off by talking a little bit about Django Middleware, when you might want to utilize it, and just familiarize ourselves, if you haven't already done so, with Django Middleware. And then we move forward, having a look at a boilerplate, activating middleware, and then move on to middleware hooks. At this point, we'll try and build an example of each. So we'll look at the process view, exceptions, template process response, and then we'll finish up with an example of capturing user data. The example which you might want to just skip to, utilizing the video timeline, we're just going to build a simple example of capturing user data, in this case, the user's operating system. And then we build out an admin area for it, for the data, and then display the data in a graph. So here, for example, 59 users or visitors who have come to the website, they're using a Windows operating system. And we can simulate more data by just refreshing this a few times. And you can see now we have 67. So let's first take a look at the definition of middleware in the Django documentation. So Django describes middleware as a framework of hooks into the Django's request response processing. It's a light, low-level plugin system for globally altering Django's input or output. So much of this might not make sense to you now, but hopefully by the end of this tutorial, we'll have a look again, and hopefully at that point, we'll have a better understanding of this description. So let's start by recapping a typical HTTP request response cycle. The client opens up a browser on their computer or their laptop or their phone, and then they request a web resource. So they want to connect to our website, which is running Django. So they type in the domain name and a HTTP request is created. Inside of this HTTP request will be the domain name in which we're trying to contact. So that information will eventually get its way to our web server, and our web server will then handle where that data needs to go. In this case, it will then push it to our Django application. And at that point, Django then needs to match the URL, which the client has typed in, to a view. So if you are familiar with Django, we know that we have views and they're connected to URLs. So a URL is attached to a view. So in this case, the URL is matched and then processed by our view. Now our view might be connected to a database and templates, and eventually we send back a HTTP response, and that might include template information and to our web server, which would then eventually get back to our client. And then of course the client would then be able to view or see the web page in their browser. So let's think about middleware as applications that run before the view processing in a Django request response cycle. So based upon this example, again, the client will request a web resource. That will be sent to the web server, and then the web server will be attached to a Django application. So Django would take that HTTP request through the middleware, each application in the middleware that's specified in the middleware settings, and then eventually the data will then be processed by the view. So once the view's finished processing, it will return a HTTP response, and that data will then go through the middleware applications once more. So the request, to confirm, the request will go through the middleware twice. It will pass through the middleware twice. So based upon that, we can build middleware which can process or react to a request, or once the view has finished, to the response. So you're probably all too familiar with the settings file of your project. Now, in every settings file, you're probably going to find a middleware section. Now, this middleware section describes all the middleware that is currently activated on your Django application. So this is the default list if you start a Django application utilizing the Django admin command. Now, you can see the order that's been provided initially. Now, this is the order in which data will pass through. So the HTTP request will pass from top to bottom, and then the HTTP response will go from bottom to top. So that's the order in which data will pass through, and that's very important. Looking at some of these different middleware here and what they actually perform, because some middleware here will actually be dependent upon other middleware to perform actions first, for example. Now, although Django provides us this middleware by default, we can actually remove all of this. Django will still work to a certain point, but it isn't recommended we do that for security reasons. So it'd be well worth your time having a look at these middleware in a little bit more detail. Now, it would take me a rather long time to explain each one here, but if you just head over to the Django documentation, if you do have a little bit of time, go over to 3.2 in the middleware section and have a look at some of these middleware and just familiarize yourself with some of the options and features that they provide. Although you might not be doing it now, eventually you might be building middleware, which is dependent upon some of the functionality that the existing middleware provides. So where you place your middleware in that list of middleware may be very important. What you will find looking at the documentation is there's middleware that isn't applied by default, which we could activate. Obviously, security middleware is there by default. The locale middleware is very interesting, enables language selection based on data from the request. That isn't activated by default. And the gzip middleware also. So this is a middleware which can compress content for browsers that understand gzip compression. And that can help speed up the delivery of data to the user. So far, I've explained the idea that the HTTP request from the client will pass through each of the middleware in order based upon what's defined in our settings file. Now, each middleware will take in the request, and then also it will then need to pass that request over to the next section or the next middleware in the list, all the way down to eventually the view. So middleware can also return a response directly instead of forwarding the request further down the chain. So this example here, the CSRF middleware, you may have already experienced a CSRF problem or error in your application. So here they have the ability to return a response directly without forwarding the request to the view. This type of feature is quite a powerful tool to have because potentially we are protecting our application from any malicious requests entering our system. So the most common question I get asked about middleware is, when should I use middleware? The starting point here is to move through the Django documentation. Now, you may not understand it all or any of it, but it should give you some general idea of the existing middleware and the actions they perform. At least at this point, you're not duplicating any of those actions. So generally, if I were to try and summarize where you might initially think about creating middleware, is when you want to filter requests. So the user makes a request and you want to filter that information for some reason. You want to inject data into requests and responses. So for example, the view handles part of the response, but then based upon the view outcome, you may want to attach more data to it, for example, or the other way around, there's a request that comes in from a user and specific information in that request. You want to filter that and utilize that to build more data, potentially that you can then utilize in the response. Probably a very common use case of middleware is to perform some sort of logging or analytics of your pages, or generating user analytics from user interactions on your site. So let's start building some middleware. Now I am starting with a basic package here, which you can download in the video description. So this is the starting code. You are going to need a virtual machine. So let's just go ahead now and build this up. Right, so that just sets up the virtual machine. That might take a couple of seconds. Let's just go ahead and activate. Right, so let's take a look at the project. It looks like we've got a problem. couldn't import Django. That's because we need a pip install Django, of course. Right, so go ahead and install Django. Normal procedures apply here. So there is a small table. So let's go ahead and just make migrations. And then let's go ahead and just migrate. We are going to need an admin user. So let's just build an admin user. So create super user. Apologies for the small text. So I'm just going to make user admin, no email, password admin, and Y. Okay, so now we've got an admin user. Let's go ahead and build a new project or new app, sorry. Start app, and then I'm going to call this demo_middleware. Right, so we're going to need a table here. So we're just going to go over into the core and settings. I'm just going to add this to my installed apps for now. And then in addition to that, we're going to need to at some point register it here in the middleware. And you can see I've already gone ahead and done that. So here I've added our new middleware that we're building into the middleware section here. So demo middleware is the name of the app. And then inside of that is going to be a new file called middleware. So let's just build this. So new file middleware.py. Obviously it's going to be optional what you want to call it. And then inside of that, we're going to build a new class called demo middleware. So let's go ahead and do that. So there's no imports at this point. So demo middleware. So first up then, let's talk a little bit about the boilerplate. Now, if you head over to the Django documentation, they do provide you two examples, one utilizing functions and the other with classes. Now, the functions method of developing middleware, I would say that was a very kind of a legacy method to generate middleware. You can still utilize and you can port it over to this class-based approach. But throughout this tutorial, I'm going to use a class-based approach to develop middleware. If you've been looking around at other examples of middleware in Django, you will find the majority of 99% of examples would be utilizing a class-based approach. So let's just walk through this. So first of all, we need the init_dunder method, right? So this is going to initiate our class, or to walk you through this boilerplate for a middleware application, we start with the class. Okay, so now when the class is instantiated, it's going to run the initialization method. Now here, what the init_dunder method is, it's a way of when the class is initiated, it will then perform some actions. So here it might be creating, for example, attributes or variables that can be then utilized throughout the class. So here, in fact, what we've done is we've taken in the get response. So how I like to look at get response is that we're basically telling Django that this application or the code that is just about to run is part of the middleware process or is part of a middleware application. So each of these middleware apps will perform actions and then basically tell Django that they finished, and then the next one can then go ahead and perform its action. So here, looking back in the code, we've essentially just told Django that this is a middleware application and we're now ready to run the code. Now, in order to tell Django that we've finished dealing with the middleware in this application, how I like to look at it is that we basically just need to return this as a response. So here we're going to set up a variable here, get response, and we're going to pass in the get response. And then when we finished everything, we're basically just going to return that. So next up, what we're going to do, the second method here is the call. So this is where we're going to perform our actions, or we're going to set up our code to perform actions in our middleware. Right, so this eventually this takes in the request, so we can deal with the request information, and then we're going to pass that in the response, and then basically just tell Django and let it know that we finished. So we're going to return the response. So to summarize, initialization, this is a one-time configuration and initialization area for variables, for example. So we then have the call. So in here, we're going to perform logic, execute logic potentially on the request before the view or other middleware is called. So you can see that we brought in the request information, and then once we've done, you can see now we're going to return the response back to Django to let it know that we finished this middleware sequence and to pass it on potentially to the next middleware application or to the view. So now we have our boilerplate active, we can now go ahead and activate our middleware. So we've partially seen this already in our core application. Now your applications might reside in the core, so this setting will be slightly different potentially. But here in this instance, the applications are in the main directory. So I'll go into my core settings. Here you can see in the middleware at the bottom, I've placed the new middleware. So this is demo middleware. That's the name of the application. Middleware is the name of the file. And then demo middleware is the class name. There we go. So that's pretty much it for activating our middleware here. Now let's just have a look here. So I've gone ahead and just added a print here. So we're going to print to the terminal. So what this is going to mean, every time someone visits our web page, this middleware is going to be initiated through the get response. And then we're then going to run this print, which is going to print to the terminal. So I've got the server started. I'm going to press refresh, and you can see now it says hello world. So now we have some information which is going to help us understand the description of middleware in the Django documentation. This is a system for globally altering Django's input or output. So based upon that simple example here, any web page that we go to or any part of the website that we visit that requires a HTTP request response cycle, our Django middleware is going to be initiated. So now we've built our first middleware application. Let's now have a look at the middleware hooks. And these are optional methods that we can utilize within our middleware. So not trying to draw this out, but it's important for us to understand these basics, for us to fully comprehend and understand where and how to utilize the methods in our middleware. So here we've seen so far, we've utilized and we set up the initialization and call. Okay, so those are two methods that are required. So here I mentioned three hooks or optional methods that we can execute at different points of the view, request, response lifecycle. So let's take a look at when our functions and methods are called in the request response cycle. Here we have, first of all, the process request. So that's the request data that can be utilized before the request gets to the view. And in second to that, we have the optional, which is process view. So we'll take a look at an example of that shortly, but this allows us access to the view before the request gets to the view. So called during the response cycle, here we have process exception. So here, if the view raises an exception, we can then utilize this as part of our middleware to perform actions. Our third optional method is process template response. This allows us to add additional context to the template before we pass it to the user. And then finally, the process response. So let's start off then by looking at our process view. So this is logic executed before a call to the view. This does give us access to the view and all the arguments, etc. So this is a fairly interesting function or method to utilize. So we can see what's being passed in here, the self request. So we still have access to the request, but we also have access directly to the function. So from here, for example, we can access information about the view through the view func here. So let's just print, for example, let's just get some information about the view. So let's go for view name. And then let's just pass in the view underscore func. And then let's just get the name. So this is going to return the name of the function that the request is trying to access. So let's just take a look at this. So our application here, our bank app here, it has a URL, which I think I've just set up here. So the home URL here is pointing to the process payment view. So in our view here, we have a process payment view. So when we go to the home page, this view should be initiated. So what we should return here, what we should print out in our terminal is the name of this view. So let's just have a go. So I'll refresh and there we go. So the view name is process payment. So should we want to access the arguments or quarks for our view, we can do. You can see that we're going to utilize view args and view quarks to do that. So I could provide some more examples here, but hopefully you get the general principle of what this is providing. It's providing access to the view before the request hits the view. And this can help us access, and maybe we can perform some checks on the data on the request before it hits the view. So maybe that's something we would want to use process view for. Maybe in later tutorials, we can have a look at this in a much more detail and give you something more of a concrete, example of utilizing process view. So let's take a look at our second optional, exceptions. So this is going to provide us a way of capturing exceptions from the view. Remember that this is part of the response cycle. So the view would have been processed and we're now capturing any exceptions. So you might be wondering what exceptions exist. When would this work? Well, let's just go ahead and access the shell and just get a list of all the exceptions. So from Django core, import exceptions. And then from here, we can then generate a nice little list and then print them out. There we go. So these are all the exceptions that would initiate our process exception method here. So it can be difficult trying to simulate this. So let's go ahead and just build our own exception. So just head over to the bank view file here. I'm just going to create or raise a demo exception. I'm just going to call that demo exception, and that's then connected to a class here called demo exception. Right, so there's no imports here. So here I'm just generating a demo exception. Now that's going to be raised before the return. So that's going to simulate our problem. So let's just go back to the middleware here. Now in our middleware, let's go ahead and create a new variable here in the initialization. So we've created a new variable, num exception 0. We're just going to record how many exceptions that we find. So what we're going to do every time there's an exception, let's go ahead and just increment that by 1, for example, and then we're just going to print that out. So for every exception that we receive, we're just going to keep a running order of that. Okay. So let's go back in and I'll just refresh. So I should now receive an exception if I had the server turned on. There we go. So demo exception. So every time I run this, we should be incrementing. We have here an exception count of 4. A few more. And you can see now it's gone up to 7. Of course, we could do the similar type of action on the requests. So for example, if we set up a separate variable here for the amount of requests that we've received, we can then go ahead and in the section here, we can add or increment our number of requests that we've received and print that out too. So for every request, I'll just do a few here, it's going to increment the number, and we can now see that we've still got the exceptions. So requests handled so far 12, exception count is 12. Right, so let's just turn off our exception here. And let's just go for this. Okay, and you can see that we're going to get the increment here for request handled so far. So let's take a look at a simple example utilizing template context response. So here, this is being utilized on the response. It allows us to add additional context data to our template, for example. So I'll just go ahead and tidy this up. We'll go back to the template boilerplate. Right, so here the process template response. So let's just set up some data up here. Right, so we're going to set up some data, just a simple message with a warning. There's no more ink in the printer. Right, so that's going to be our context response. Okay, right, so let's go ahead now and set up this response. So here we're going to collect that context response and response.context data. That's going to be our new data. So what we're doing here is we're creating, if you like, a new piece of context that we're going to pass to the template that we can utilize to render on the template. And that's going to be accessed through new data. So we're going to be able to access the data that we set up here up the top through new data on our template. So let's go ahead and just return the response. And now what we're going to need to do is collect this data on our template. So in our templates here in index. So I'm just going to create a div placeholder here where we can output that context data. And then we're going to collect the data, so new data. We're going to collect that information so that we can then utilize it. So in our script here, we're going to get the data, the context data that we've set up here by name. Okay, new data. And then we're going to go into that data, and then I'm going to look for the message. So let's just go back to my middleware. So I'm going to select the message, and then I'm going to print out the warning. So message.warning. So there I've just basically drilled down to my data where what I wanted to print out. So once I've done that, I can then go ahead and, for example, document get element by ID, template response. I'm just going to inject the message into this div element here. And it should then be displayed on the screen. So when I refresh now, you can now see it says there is no more ink in the printer. So that takes us to our last example. So now we're going to capture from the request the user's data. So here we're going to try and capture what operating system the user is currently using, and then we're going to develop a database to capture and record that information. And then in the admin area, we'll then create a graph showing the data that we've captured. So this is what the final outcome is going to look like. So key to developing middleware is to understand what data is stored in and generated in the request and the response. So just looking at our browser here and going into the console, I can go over to network and then just refresh. So if I have a look at the data that's generated from my request, just draw this up. Here I can see that my request headers, there's information here in the request headers that I'm sending across to the server. So let's just go over to google.com. and just do the same thing again. So I just refresh this page. So I've got the network open here. Let's go to the top, my request. So down here, I can see the request headers. So this information here is being passed in the request. So if you're wondering what data can be collected from the request as it travels into the server, and then the data that we can capture either in our middleware or in the view, this gives us a good indication of the type of data that we can collect in the request headers. Now, also here we have the response headers. So this also gives us some interesting information potentially of information we might want to collect or have a look at, analyze before it then is sent to the user. So again, just to emphasize, it would be useful for you to read through the HTTP request and response cycle to get a better idea of how that is working and what type of data you can collect. So let's just tidy this back here to our our template or boilerplate. So let's just quickly move through and have a look at some of the data that we could potentially collect. So here I'm just going to, from the request, just set out a number of different prints here. Right, so first of all is a path. So this is going to give me a return. So let's have a look at the response. So I just go ahead and refresh my page. So here I'm going to collect a number of different items. So first of all, the path. So that's going to give me the path for the page. So in this case, it's just the root directory. So / is returned. So that can be useful because here I could utilize that data to build some sort of counter. So for every page, I could build a counter for that page. So I could detect what page has been requested and then update the database to correspond to the page that has been viewed. So that's request path, for example. Now I can also drill down to headers, request headers. So that is referring to, if we go back here and press F12 and network and refresh, this is referring to this data here, request headers. So for example, I could access the host or cookie or connection. So I can utilize these key data points here to collect this information. It might be useful. So for here, for example, the user agent, this is telling me that this user is using Windows, for example. So here I've selected host, and you can now see I've outputted the host IP. So accept language. So these are just other examples, accept language. So I could maybe do some filtering based upon the language setup of the browser. And that could give me an indication of how to display the page to the user. And the different languages, I may be able to swap over languages based upon what the browser has been set or defined to, the languages that it's been set to. Here I can get, for example, the request method. So this draws down into meta. So this is a separate set of data now that I can draw from the request, the metadata. So again, you'll find it online if you just type in request metadata, HTTP request metadata. You'll find a list of all the different data. I think the Django documentation also has a page for this, and it details all the different metadata that you can collect. So here's the request method, get, post, delete, update, for example. And then finally, the user agent. And you can see the data here is giving me an indication of what operating system the user is using. So we can just see that in action, in actual fact. So if I were to, for example, let's just bring this down a bit. If I were, for example, to switch over to say a mobile and then refresh, you can now see it's telling me that Linux Android is being utilized. And then I can do the same thing there for iPhone. It looks like an iPhone is utilizing. So you can see potentially the information we could collect there regarding the user's operating system. So of course, we're going to do exactly that for our last example here. So let's just keep this in mind. The HTTP user agent, that's going to be useful for us to identify what operating system the user is currently using. Right, so let's now build this up. So I'm going to create a new function here. I'm going to call this just stats, for example. I'm going to take in self and then, for example, OS info. Okay. Right, so here what I'm going to do is just set out a simple if statement, if else statement, which is going to have a look at the data that we collect from the request meta, the HTTP user agent, and I'm just going to detect certain words. So if it's a Windows operating system, Windows is going to appear in this string. If it's Android, we've seen it on iPhone, you can see that the keywords are going to be in this string. So we're just going to capture that, and for each one that we capture, we're then going to update the database to correspond to the operating system that the user is using. So let's just go ahead. So if Windows is in the OS information, so we're going to pass that information across. Then we're going to then just update the database. So here I'm going to be utilizing F function. So I need to bring that in. Now I haven't made the database yet, but this is how I'm going to set it up. So there's going to be a field called Win for Windows, and I'm just going to increment that by 1 anytime we see windows in the HTTP user agent information. Right, so next up then will be Mac. So I just use an else if for Mac. Same thing again, I'll update the new field called Mac, and then iPhone, same thing again, and then for Android, and then else we're just going to update a field called other, or OTH, and there we go. So that is a simple sequence there where we're going to capture what's inside of our HTTP user agent information, and then we're just going to auto increment our database. Right, so we're going to need to pass that across. So let's do that. So let's run the function stats, and then just send across the request information. Remember, that information is going to store what we saw earlier, just to kind of reiterate that fact. So it's going to be storing this user agent information here, which is going to identify keywords iPhone, Windows, Android. Now, we probably don't want to update the statistics if, for example, the user has gone to the admin area. So we don't want to record admin views. So what we can do is just a simple if statement here. So if the word admin is in the request path, now the request path is going to produce, for example, here in the admin, if we were to go to the admin, the request path is going to include the word admin in the request path. So that means we can then filter that out from the request path. And then if the request path is not in the admin, we're going to run our stats and update our database. So our database is going to be relatively simple here. We're going to have 5 fields. So I'm going to call this new stats. That was the name of our database, new stats. Now here in the middleware, I hadn't actually imported our model. So let's also add our model in. So it's called new stats. Apologies, the flow here, if you're not used to this, the flow might be a little bit out, but you can see we've created a new model here. So let's just go ahead now and make migrations and migrate. So we've now built this table. It's now ready for us to utilize. So let's just go over to the admin and let's just set this up. So what we're going to do here is let's first of all just register. So from models, let's import new stats, and then we'll just go ahead and register this. Now just prepare this. I'll use the decorator here and I'll just pass this for now. So we are going to expand on this shortly, and with this new class, this allows us to provide some additional customization of our admin section. So we're going to need this shortly. So I've just registered it for now, and let's just go ahead and start our server. Okay, and we just make sure this is all working. So I have already set up a user, admin and admin. We've got this new table here, new stats. There we go. So let's add a new stat, and we can add some numbers straight away here. Okay, right. So let's press save, and there we go. So we've got a set of data here for each operating system. So now we need to perform some customizations here for our admin area so that we can enter or add the graph up the top. Now this is pretty simple in actual fact. The first thing we need to do is create a new template. Right, so in templates, let's create a new folder. Now what we're doing here is we're just following a pattern that's set. So we know we want to build an admin template, so we call this admin. Right, so now we need to follow this path. So admin, demo middleware, new stats. So that's the structure here. So inside of admin, we're going to have a new folder called demo middleware. Inside of there, we're going to have a new folder, and that is called new stats. So that's going to provide a path for Django to utilize for us to then add a template. So let's just add a new template. This is going to be called change list. Right, so as I create a new file called change underscore list .html. Okay. So now we're going to override this template just by adding a title, and from there we can see where we're working. We can expand and add our graph. So back in the code here then, this is in the changelist.html. We're going to override or extend admin changelist.html, and then we're going to load any static, create our new block, and we're just going to add hello world. So it just appears just underneath the change new stats, just so we can see where we're working. And then the block super, this is a reference to all this other, all these other elements here that you see on this template. Right, so with that done, let's go ahead and end the block, and we'll just run that now. So with those changes, remember we need to go into the main section of new stats here, and we can now see we have hello world. So there's two steps left. First of all, we need a way of actually getting our data from our database over to the actual template so that we can display it. And then secondly, we need to generate a graph of some sort. To actually build the chart, we're going to use chart.js for no particular reason. This is just a very simple tool to utilize to build charts. So it has some great samples and also some great documentation to run through if you did want to utilize this for any other of your applications. Right, so let's just go ahead and build the framework for this. So we're just going to remove our block content and all the other items and rebuild this. Right, so we're going to create this block called extra head here, and then we're going to utilize block super. Right, so if you haven't used block super before, if you need to get the content of the block from the parent template, this will do the trick. So the idea here is that we're trying to add contents rather than completely overriding the template. So let's move on to creating the link now to the chart.js. So here we're going to bring in the CSS and then also the JS bundle. So that's going to obviously allow us to run the chart. That's all the JavaScript for the charts functionality and the CSS. And now we can then think about where we're going to put our chart. So here we're just going to create a div here, element, canvas, and we're going to give us an ID of my chart. Right, so that's where the actual chart is going to be placed. Right, so once we've done that, let's start now kind of initializing and connecting this up. So we create this new variable here, document.element by ID my chart. So we get the canvas, and we kind of then are going to prepare that for us to then essentially put the chart onto the canvas. So now what we can do, here we're going to render the chart. So chart, new chart, we're going to bring in our canvas, if you like, here, so that we can prepare. And now we're going to define what type of chart we want to create. So in this case, it's going to be a bar chart. Now head over to chart.js. Obviously there it's going to provide a lot of other examples. Maybe you wanted to turn this into a pie chart, for example. So that's the type of chart that we're going to run. And we're going to need some data for this. So I've created some labels. Here we're going to have a Y and X axis. So these labels here correspond to the X axis. So we're going to have 5 sections along the X axis of our bar chart, Windows, Mac, iPhone, Android, and other. Right, so now we're going to need some data. So there's a label. So this is the label for the chart. So I'm just going to call this hashtag of visits, number of visits per operating system in this case. And then I'm just going to add some data for now. So we're going to swap that in a little bit by grabbing the data from our database and putting it right here. But we're just going to add a template or some placeholders here of data so that we can just see this in action. And now we can just go ahead and define the colors. So this is the background color. So these here refer to, we have 1, 2, 3, 5 along the x-axis here, 5 chart sections. So these colors here will correspond to each one. So I've only added 2 here. You could go ahead and add 5 if you want. And then you can also change, for example, the border color. So you can have a separate border color for each of the bar chart sections. Right, so once that's done, you can also define the border width if you want, and we can also then add some other options. Now, by default, the y-axis won't begin at 0, so I've just gone ahead and head along the y-axis here, and I've just changed it so it begins at 0. So our y and our x will meet at 0. Else, what you're going to find is that normally what happens by default, the chart shows the lowest quantity. And it doesn't actually then show as a bar chart, it's just the lowest quantity. So go ahead and have a look for yourself, but I've defined that as 0. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So if I refresh, you can see 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5. There goes, that's the data we have in place. You can see these are grayed items because I didn't color them. I did color the first two. So you can go ahead and do that. We've got a number of visits up here, and we can see that the scale starts from 0. Right. So now what we need to do is get our data from the database here and then get it so it appears in our graph. So we need to collect the data. That's going to be from the admin area. So what we're going to need to do here is to collect the data from our model. We've already imported in our model here. And then we're going to pass that as, we're going to serialize that. And then we're going to prepare it so we can pass it over to JavaScript. I always try to, where possible, introduce new Django tools and features, and this is one of them here. So in order to get our data ready to be sent across or utilized by JavaScript, we need to convert or serialize to a format that we can then pass over to JavaScript. Now here, for example, I just wanted to showcase the Django JSON encoder. So if you are, and it's likely that you will be at one point, encoding date time, this is a great tool to utilize, and it's well worth just making a note. And when you do start kind of encoding date time, this can be really handy to utilize, and we are going to utilize it out of context here to do this. So of course we've got other tools. The Django core imports serializers to prepare our data before we move it across, but in this case I'm just going to use the Django JSON encoder just because. Right. So now we need to prepare our data. So we're going to collect the data from our database, and then we're going to prepare it and then send it across so we can then utilize it on our change list admin template. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new function here. I'm going to call this changelist.view, changelist_view, self request, and then extra content. And now we're going to set up the data. So now we're going to collect our table, new stats, objects dot, and then we're going to utilize annotate, and with the values Win, Mac, iPhone, Android, and other. So we're going to collect, way to look at this, I guess, is that we're going to cycle through the database, and then for each item in the database that we find, remember there's 5 fields in our table, and we're going to essentially add a label against our data. I guess that's how I like to look at that. So now we've got this in place. Let's go ahead now and, well, I'll give you another example here of just utilizing serializer here. So if you did want to just utilize the import serializers to perform the same or similar actions, you can do. So now we've got our data. We're now going to use JSON dumps. So that essentially is a way of converting a Python object into JSON. Yeah, so the function converts a Python object into a JSON string. So you can see that we're going to build this list. We're utilizing our data that we've extracted from our database. So now we've done that, let's now pass it back to extra context. So here we're going to pass this through extra context. We're going to reference the data as stat data, and here we have as JSON. So that was taken, like I said, our Python object into a JSON string. So we're going to essentially pass this across with a reference point of stat data, our JSON string. So I do apologize, there's a lot going on here and I haven't explained this fully like some people would need. For others, it'd be absolutely fine. For example, if you've never used annotate before, you probably won't know exactly what's going on there. So it's worth having a look at that. Now, if you do want to, if you're trying to explore this code a little bit further, utilize print. for example, to print out different items on this page, work out the data that's actually being moved around. Once you understand the data types, once you can see what data is actually being generated, collected, and moved around, it does make your life a lot easier to work out what's actually happening. And then I apologize for those who are experienced, and this is just very simple and very naive, potentially some of this, because I'm just trying to showcase other tools here. Right, so now we've got that in place, we've saved that. So now let's collect this data now on our template. So let's go ahead and create a new variable here, chart data. Now we're going to collect the data. Okay, so now we've got the data passed over and we're storing it now in chart data. So let's just go ahead and, for example, let's just create a new array in preparation. And now we're going to create a for loop. So we're going to just loop through the data. And here you can see we're just going to loop through the data. And we're just going to get the values. So chart data, 0. And it's going to then grab the values. And we're then going to just push those values into our array called ARR. And now what we can do is we can utilize this. We can remove our data from here, type in ARR. You can obviously name that more appropriately. So that's our data now in place. So let's go ahead now and just see if this works. So if I refresh, we are getting an error, name JSON not defined. Okay, so the problem here is that I was going to show, then I forgot, apologies. Oh, not there. We need to import JSON here up top. I've just forgotten to return. So what we need to do here is return super.change list view and then request and then the extra content equals, and then it's going to equal our new extra content. Right, so that's essentially going to pass that back to our template now. We've got this extra context we're bringing in, which is the stat data. So now that was then moving across now to here. So what we've done is we've just collected that data, stat data, and then we've now prepared that in a new variable. And then we've just used this for here to loop through and grab the values from our data. And then we've just pushed that to this array here so that we can then just output it here in our graph. Right, so when we go back now and refresh, we can now see we have some data. Right, so let's just see if this works. So we'll just open up a new window. Right, so I just refresh a few times and then I press refresh. So you can see that this is going to be a Windows. Remember, if I press F12, just refresh, remember that the headers here, we're sending across, oh, actually, in this case, we're sending across iPhone. 1 second. So in this case here, we're sending across and the user agent has Windows. So remember, we're capturing that, or we're looking for that name. If we find that name, we're going to update. So it says 16 at the moment. So let's just refresh this a few times. Refresh again. And now you can see we've got 24 visits. Right, so let's just move this into, for example, iPhone. So at the moment, we've got 11 iPhone visits. I'll just refresh a few times here. And then I'll go back. You can now see we've got 20 iPhone visits. So should you need a quick recap, remember that what's happening here is we are initiating our middleware. We are then utilizing call here to basically collect the request information. So here what we're doing, if it's admin, then we're just going to ignore. So if it's not an admin, else, so if the path doesn't have the word admin in it, remember we are basically just checking for that. So if they are in the admin, we're not going to collect those stats. So what's happening now is that we're just going to pass across to our function, stats function, the request meta HTTP user agent. Now remember, what's inside of there is that information which I've been showing you right here. So essentially that information here is being stored there or sent across. Now this has got the word iPhone. Obviously if I change this to something else like Windows, it's going to have the word Windows in there. So what we're trying to do is we're just filtering that out using some if statements. So we pass it over to this, we pass that data across here. And then basically we're just looking for keywords inside of this string that we've collected in the HTTP user agent data. And then basically we're just using the F here to create an update. We're just incrementing by 1 in the database. So that's the database side. So remember the admin side, what we've done is we created a database that's been updated. So now what we're doing is we're basically just trying to collect that data, prepare it ready to send across. So we use JSON dumps essentially for that. And then we send that across as extra context over to our change list template. Then we've collected that data. We've then looped through for the values, for example, and we put that into array and we've outputted it to our new chart. If you have got this far, thank you very much for listening and going through that process. I do hope it was useful. There are times here maybe where I've skipped a little bit or haven't explained fully. That wasn't due to me trying to speed up or slow down. Trying to find that balance between providing this type of content to new users and maybe those who have a little bit of experience is quite difficult, because this might be considered a higher level, an advanced tutorial. And I was trying to bridge that gap so that somewhere in the middle, so that newer users can understand and maybe those advanced can breeze through. So again, thank you very much for listening. I do hope it was useful, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.